Why do we fight? This is a question that humans have asked themselves for centuries. Another question, one asked less often, though no less important, is why do we keep fighting? War may have its moments of genuine glory or heroism. Some wars may even be genuinely righteous ones. But you only need to take a cursory glance to see past the shining patina to the mountains of corpses that lie beneath. From Cannae to the Somme, from Constantinople to Hiroshima, death and suffering have always remained the eternal byproducts of war. So, why do we continue to fight? Why do men keep risking their lives even in the face of certain defeat and annihilation? What keeps them going in the face of horrors that often leave them mentally scarred? It turns out that the reasons are many and varied. Fear of the enemy, or fear for your loved ones. Hatred of that enemy. Love of your comrade. Devotion to a leader or a country. And of course, faith. Faith in God, faith in a cause, faith in an ideal to be achieved. Faith, religious or otherwise, was, and perhaps always will be, a vital aspect of the human condition. And in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, faith is one of the few things that has kept the Imperium of Man together in the face of its innumerable enemies. "My faith is my shield" is a common saying among those who risk their lives in the name of the God Emperor and in the cause of human supremacy. But in a society as religious as the Imperium, faith can be more than a shield. More often than not, faith is a weapon. And sometimes that weapon takes the form of a woman, clad in power armor, wielding a chainsword and a flamer, her eyes burning with righteous fury. For of all the servants of the God Emperor's will, none are more zealous than the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle. The story of the Adepta Sororitas begins in Millennia 36, during what is known as the Age of Apostasy. Now, describing the Age of Apostasy would require an hour-long video, since this is a period of time that covers roughly 1,000 years. So instead, I'm going to stick to details that are relevant to the subject of this video. What you need to know in this instance is that the Age of Apostasy began with the culmination of an ongoing power struggle that had been going on since the Horus Heresy. A power struggle between the Adeptus Ministorum and the Adeptus Administratum, the Imperial Church versus the civil service. Now, while priests versus bureaucrats sounds like the setup for an episode of Most Extreme Elimination Challenge, the reality, while just as painful as an episode of MXC, was far less amusing. By Millennia 36, the Imperial Church was the official state religion of the Imperium of Man, and thus the priesthood had control over the hearts and minds of trillions of citizens across the galaxy. And thanks to tithes extracted from said citizenry in exchange for spiritual salvation, the Church was able to field its own armies of trained zealot soldiers known as the Frateris Templars. On the other hand, the Administratum controlled the levers of power. Most importantly, they were the ones who decided who was appointed to what position. And over the many centuries, and indeed millennia since the Horus Heresy, the Administratum was able to undermine the ecclesiarchy by making sure that weak and ineffective leaders were appointed to high-ranking positions within the Church. Matters finally came to a head in early M36, when the master of the Administratum, one Gog Van Dyer, decided that he was no longer content with even a puppet ecclesiarch. Suiting action to intent, Van Dyer flew to the planet of Ophelia 7, which is basically the Vatican City of the Imperium, declared the reigning ecclesiarch Paulus III a heretic, executed him, and declared that he would now be head of the Imperial Church as well as the civil service. At first, most of the Imperium supported this power grab by Van Dyer. Like all institutions created by men, the ecclesiarchy by this point was incredibly overbearing, corrupt, and venal. The people of the Imperium were simply sick of being harassed by the Frateris Templars over whether or not they'd accepted the God Emperor as their Lord and Savior. And they were even more sick and tired of paying exorbitant tithes to the Church, also that some random bishop or cardinal could one-up his neighbor by building an even bigger shrine/palatial estate than him. Unfortunately, those same people soon discovered that what Van Dyer lacked in greed and corruption, he more than made up for in violent insanity. This is a man who regularly fell over unconscious and then woke up declaring that he'd received instructions directly from the emperor himself. Instructions that ranged from ridiculous to downright genocidal. This is a man who, among other things, ordered the purging of any human being with red hair on a single planet, forbade the entire population of another planet from looking at the sky on pain of death, subjected several other planets to virus bombing to eliminate imagined mutations, commanded the creation of an Imperial Guard regiment consisting entirely of girls under the age of 12, and ordered the melting of ice caps on an agri-world, causing planet-wide flooding which killed not only millions of people, but also their crops, thus starving the populations of several other worlds of desperately needed food. And, just to put the cherry on top, he seeded Terra with so much surveillance equipment and recording devices that it makes 1984 look like a libertarian paradise. In brief, this guy was Joseph Stalin in a Pope hat. So many millions of people died under his reign that this period in imperial history is remembered as the Reign of Blood. It was during this infamous time period that Van Dyer received word of a strange little imperial cult that had recently arisen on a planet called San Lior. This cult, calling themselves the Daughters of the Emperor, were warrior nuns who had dedicated their lives entirely to the service of the God Emperor. Bitten by the bug of curiosity, the Lord of the Imperium decided to go and meet these women for himself. Accompanied by an entourage of thousands, Van Dyer made his way to the planet and then to the monastery where the Daughters of the Emperor lived, and demanded that they acknowledge his authority as the most powerful man in the Imperium, which he was. The leader of the Daughters, Alicia Dominica, refused, saying that their oath was to the Emperor and not to any mortal man. To the surprise of those around him, Van Dyer did not immediately begin frothing at the mouth and order that the planet be put to the cleansing flame. Instead, he asked to come inside and speak with Alicia, bringing only a few bodyguards with him. Alicia accepted this request, but when Van Dyer came inside and once again tried to persuade her and the other Daughters of the Emperor to pledge their loyalty to him, she refused. Van Dyer then said that he would prove to her that the Big E was in fact in his corner. So saying, he knelt in prayer, held up his ecclesiarchal rosarius, and ordered one of his own guards to shoot him with a las pistol. The trigger was pulled, the las bolt flew, there was a flash of light, and there was Van Dyer, with not even a singe on his robes. Overawed by this apparent display of divine favor, Alicia and the Daughters of the Emperor knelt and pledged their fealty to Gog Van Dyer. Exactly as Van Dyer had planned. Personal energy shields do exist in 40K, but they are incredibly rare and hard to acquire, even for someone with incredible wealth and power. In fact, most citizens of the Imperium don't even know that such technology exists, which of course was exactly what Van Dyer was counting on, for there had been such a shield built into his rosarius, and the credulous Daughters of the Emperor had bought his miracle, hook, line, and sinker. And so the most powerful man in the Imperium returned to Terra, a smug little smile on his face, a new swagger in his step, and a coterie of several hundred highly trained warrior women as his new bodyguards. But a reign of blood and terror can only last so long before it finally cracks. And that crack took the form of a humble preacher on the planet of Dimimar named Sebastian Thor. At a time when the great and powerful of the Imperium dared not so much as whisper against the High Lord Van Dyer of Terra, Thor openly preached against him and urged the people who listened to him to rebel against the madman. When Van Dyer sent a fleet out to crush Thor's nascent rebellion, it was consumed by a massive warp storm and was never seen again. The warp storm, known as the Storm of the Emperor's Wrath, was seized upon by the desperate populace as a sign that it was the will of the God Emperor himself that Van Dyer had to go. at long last, all of the fear, all of the anger, all of the desperation was unleashed, and it had a focus and a target. Thor's rebellion, referred to as the Confederacy of Light, soon gained support from both the Adeptus Astartes and the Adeptus Mechanicus, while Vandire's support swiftly evaporated, except for his Amazonian bodyguards, who now referred to themselves as the Brides of the Emperor. Before long, the Confederacy of Light surrounded Holy Terra itself, while an army of Tech Guard and 4,000 Space Marines laid siege to the Imperial Palace. Ranged against them were the Brides of the Emperor, now numbering 10,000 battle sisters, and equipped with the best armor and weapons their insane and all-powerful master could obtain for them. They also had the advantage of a strong defensive position. After all, the Imperial Palace once resisted for years against hundreds of thousands of traitor Space Marines during the Horus Heresy. The result was a grinding siege that could have lasted for decades, but for something that no one, least of all the insane Vandire, could have anticipated: an intervention by the Adeptus Custodes. Normally, as per their oaths, the Custodes spend their days in the Sanctorum Imperialis, guarding the physical person of the Emperor and not involving themselves in affairs outside. However, when the Captain General of the Custodes learned that the Imperium was being run by a madman, and that the Imperial Palace was being besieged by loyal forces, he decided that something had to be done. By secret means known only to the Custodes, the Captain General was able to make contact with the Brides of the Emperor and with their leader, Alicia Dominica. The sources say that when he met the women, the Captain General immediately sensed the purity of their faith and their intent. He realized that they were not evil, merely misled, and so instead of cutting them down, he tried to persuade them that Vandire was evil and had to be opposed. Alicia refused. She had witnessed the miracle on San Lior. Vandire was the Emperor's chosen. His will was the Emperor's will, and she was bound by her own oaths to obey. And so the Captain General made a final offer: to grant Alicia and some of her companions the unthinkable, an audience with the God Emperor himself. Alicia agreed, and with 5 companions followed the Captain General into the Sanctorum Imperialis and went before the Golden Throne itself. No one knows exactly what happened, whether or not the Emperor actually spoke to Alicia and her companions, because all involved were sworn to secrecy. But when it was over, and the Brides of the Emperor emerged, they had been convinced. Eyes alight with righteous fury, Alicia Dominica sought out Gog Vandire. She found the insane ruler of the Imperium all alone in a dusty strategium chamber covered in cobwebs, fiddling with equipment that no longer worked, yelling at personnel that were not there. Alicia Dominica then made a declaration to Vandire, one that would be inscribed on her sarcophagus many years later. "You have committed the ultimate heresy. Not only have you turned your back on the Emperor and stepped from his light, you have profaned his name and almost destroyed everything he has striven to build. You have perverted and twisted the path that he has laid for mankind to tread. As your own decrees have stated, there can be no mercy for such a criminal. I renounce your lordship. You walk in the darkness and cannot be allowed to live. Your sentence has been long overdue, and now it is time for you to die." Vandire's last words in life are said to have been a distracted, "I don't have time to die, I'm too busy." At which point, to borrow a line from Solomon Kane, Alicia Dominica eased this evil man of his life by removing his head with her power sword. Carrying the madman's head under one arm, Alicia gave orders that an offer of ceasefire be sent to the besiegers. The reign of blood was over. Given their association with Vandire, you would think that the former brides would be executed as traitors after Thor and his allies reclaimed Terra. That was, after all, the fate that befell the rest of Vandire's partisans. Fortunately, the Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes was there to vouch for them, convincing the others that the brides had merely been misguided instead of treasonous. Fortunately for Alicia and her followers, when the man in charge of safeguarding the God Emperor's person himself says you're kosher, other people can do naught but acquiesce. Many things resulted from the fallout of Van Dyer's death, but only two are relevant to the history of the Adeptus Sororitas. The first, after the Council of High Lords was restored to power, was the appointment of Sebastian Thor as the new ecclesiarch over his own protests, and the implementation of the Decree Passive, a new law that ordered the Ministorum to disband the Frateris Templars and its own fleets. The church would be allowed to muster militia forces in emergencies, but they were now explicitly forbidden from having a standing army. Thor was willing to accept the decree, but he didn't like the idea of leaving the ecclesiarchy entirely defenseless. Fortunately, there was a convenient loophole. The terms of the decree passive were that the ecclesiarchy would not be allowed to maintain, quote, men under arms. Fortunately, the former brides of the emperor were not men, and Thor was able to persuade the High Lords to have them organized as an official imperial institution, the Adeptus Sororitas, the sort of official military wing of the imperial church. The second event was the Inquisition's decision to form the Ordo Hereticus for the specific purpose of hunting down traitors and heretics. A few years after the end of the Reign of Blood, the Ordo Hereticus and the newly minted Sororitas agreed to the Convocation of Nephilim, in which the Sisters of Battle became an official chamber militant of the new Ordo. This meant that, in addition to being the military arm of the Imperial Church, the Sisters of Battle were now a quasi-official arm of the Inquisition in general and the Ordo Hereticus in particular, a dedicated military force that an inquisitor can call upon in a pinch when all other resources might be unavailable to him. As for Alicia Dominica, she and the 5 companions that had gone before the Golden Throne went on to found various militant orders within the newly made Adeptus Sororitas, and would spend the rest of their lives fighting against the many enemies of the Imperium. All would eventually be canonized as saints of the Imperial Church. And that is how the Adeptus Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, came to be. Now, this video is turning out to be longer than I expected it to be. For that reason, I've just decided to split this video on the Adeptus Sororitas into 2 parts. This week is obviously the history, the origin of the Adeptus Sororitas. Next week will be about the Sororitas in modern 40k, their organization, their tactics, some of their unique weapons, how they are trained, as well as their take on the imperial religion and their veneration of the God Emperor. Until next time. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, and check out our website at studiobrainstorm.net. And if you have a story that you think is worth telling, we are more than happy to help you publish it. Thank you, and have a nice day.